Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the 250 events in the life of Jesus. And if you haven't been following along, we're doing this chronologically through the Gospels. We're looking at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John as it rolled out, as it happened. If you actually go back and read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John the way it's in the Bible, they weren't necessarily in a particular order always, or in chronological order always. I mean, they had the beginning and the end, but some of the stuff was shifted around based on the different styles of writing. So we're looking at it chronologically as it did happen, and so I feel like we get a little bit more out of it, and we can kind of see the things as they play out together, and we see the harmony in the Gospels with that as well. And so today we're looking at the leaders demanding a miraculous sign, and yesterday we looked at Jesus feeding the 4,000, and the miracle that happened there. And so this goes in Matthew 16. I'm going to do it out of Matthew, like I've been. I like to stay in Matthew for the most part, unless there's just something that really pulls out. But if looking at Matthew 16, right, 1 through 4 for this, right, the leaders demand a miraculous sign. And it says one day the Pharisees and Sadducees came to test Jesus, and they did this on a regular basis, demanding that he show them a miraculous sign, not asking, demanding from heaven to prove his authority. And he replied, so he replies to them with this: You know the saying, red sky at night means fair weather tomorrow, red sky in the morning means foul weather all day. You know how to interpret the weather signs in the sky, but you don't know how to interpret the signs of the times, which is, he's talking about him. Only an evil, adulterous generation would demand a miraculous sign, but the only sign I will give them is the sign of the prophet Jonah. We're going to look at that. And then Jesus left him and went away. And so he's like, look, you're not even worth it. He starts, his confrontations with them seem to get a little bit more ratcheted up every single time. And he calls them an evil, adulterous generation. And so if we go back and look at this, right? One, the Pharisees and the Sadducees were bitter opponents, actually. But they joined forces to come against Jesus, right? To try to go after Jesus. And the main reason for that was because he was a threat to both of their leadership and both of their powers. And anytime you have that, anytime you have someone in authority and power, and they see someone who's a threat to their power, then they're going to be willing to team up with other people to make sure that threat doesn't happen. We see that a lot. And so, Jesus could have easily impressed them. And here's the thing: if they wanted to see a miracle, all they had to do was follow him around. He was always healing people. But this was one of those times where they were coming in demanding, right? You don't see anyone who's being healed where they come to Jesus and demand that Jesus heals them. They ask. They usually they're begging or they're pleading for Jesus to help them. And this is just an arrogant attitude that they have. And so he knew, right? He knew deep down, even a miracle on demand was not going to convince them that he was the Messiah, right? They had already chosen not to believe him. They were not going to believe him, and they didn't believe him. And so the signs of the time that Jesus is referring to here, and he uses this verse 2 and 3, to kind of show that, hey, look, you can see, like, you can predict the weather by the color of the sky, right? He's like, you can see that, but you can't see the signs of the time. And the signs of the time that he was talking about was the various miracles that he actually had already done and would continue to do throughout his entire ministry. But then he shifts it into, he calls them evil and an adulterous generation. He insults them there. And listen, only they would demand a sign. But he says, the only sign I'm going to give you is that of the prophet Jonah. And if you understand then the story of Jonah and the whale, right? If you have that, what he's talking about there is Jonah spent 3 days in the belly of a great fish. As we say Jonah and the whale. It was a great fish. We don't know what kind of fish it was. It doesn't say. And so what Jesus was doing here, he was predicting his death and resurrection, right? And so Jonah's rescue from the great fish that we see in the book of Jonah was a sign that the prophet was prophet and his message were from God. And so he's saying, and there's a lot of other parallels that we could probably go into a little bit deeper in a different session. But he's sitting there saying, he's basically saying, look, I'm going to go on the ground for 3 days. I'm going to come back out just like Jonah did. That's going to be my sign to you. That's all you're going to get from me. And what's crazy? It's a crazy thing to see. And so similarity, right? The ultimate sign validating Jesus would be his triumph over death, and that was the thing that that Jesus is a sign. And I wonder, right? I'll, the Pharisees and the Sadducees right then, they didn't understand what he's talking about, right? Because they would have thought of Jonah and the great fish. They would have thought of that. That it wouldn't have made sense to them. And I wonder after his resurrection if they recalled this, because I'm sure they passed this message along to others. And I just wonder if what their recollection of this was. And I wonder, maybe it convinced some of them. Maybe it did convince some of them to that he was. We know that there was a lot of people who did eventually start following Jesus. We don't know how many Pharisees, how many Sadducees. Some of them did. And so maybe that helped convince some of them to say, "Hey, man, this really is who he says he is." And so you see them here again testing God, and this is something that we're not, you know, we shouldn't try to do. We shouldn't try to test God. And I think sometimes, and I'm going to be careful how I say this, we need to be careful when we say, "Well, God, I'll do this if you give me a sign," right? Or I'll do, we need to be careful with that. I know, and I'm not saying because I've done that before, but we need to be careful in our attitude toward that. I'm not saying don't pray for things and say, "Hey, show me the way, show me the," but a lot of times you'd be like, well, if this happens, then show me the sign or show me this sign. And I think we need to be careful in testing God and some stuff like that. I'm not saying that we don't pray to God and say, "Hey, show me a sign of what you want me to do. Show me the direction that kind of stuff." We should be praying that all the time. But I'd be careful if you're trying to test him and put him to the test on it, because Bible says we shouldn't put him to the test, and so we need to be careful with that. As always, I appreciate y'all for watching. I hope you're enjoying these videos. If you find them useful, please share them with someone else. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, please go ahead and do so. And as always, thank you for watching.